working and getting a paycheck.
Yeah, I know. Hey, I can have him over if you want.
No. Yeah, it's pretty exciting that we have people over here.
We did it on purpose because we didn't want you over here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You missed the fact that no one else wanted it. We tried to get you to take it, Larry. Yeah, exactly. That's the response we got. Okay, we'll get started because, as usual, the sooner we get started, hopefully the sooner we're going to finish. I will call the meeting to order of the Transportation Advisory Committee for the Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments, January 17th. It is 1:31. We're a minute late, so not bad. We have a quorum, and we'll start with introductions. Tim?
Tim Roberts, City of Colorado Springs.
Jason Dosh, Town of Palmer Lake.
Darren Horsemeyer, Schriever Air Force Base.
Rick Orphan, Fort Carson.
Brian Vituli, City of Colorado Springs, Mountain Metro Transit.
John Leo Santos, PPACG.
Wendy Pettit, CDOT Region 2.
Patty Henshin, CDOT Region 2.
Darren Tansman, Woodland Park.
Paul Soignier, Councilman, Woodland Park.
Karen Birchtold, City of Manitou Springs.
And
Victoria Chavez, El Paso
I
County.
didn't even introduce myself. Brandy Williams, City of Fountain. And in the audience?
Dave Manhire, just wrapped up a fellowship working for Ryan Trujillo in Colorado Springs Innovation and Sustainability.
Oh.
Doug Lawler, Engineer. Ken Brader, PPACG.
And Steph.
Bechtel, PPACG.
And Aaron is wandering around, and maybe he can introduce himself by talking.
Aaron Musto, Federal Highways.
Install. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
I'll second.
Comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Public comments? Items not on the agenda?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Aaron, I don't know, for the information on the government shutdown that you and I were just talking about, you could do it under this item, or you could do it under member entity announcements. So I don't know if you want to plan on being here towards the end of the meeting or just do it now.
I can do it now. It's pretty quick. So just to give everybody an update, you've probably heard that we are having a government shutdown right now.
No.
That affects parts of the U.S. DOT, specifically a related partner, FTA. But it does not affect Federal Highway Administration. If you want more information on why, in a nutshell, it's the authorization bill, gives us contract authority, and we're funded through the trust fund, not the general fund. So we're good for now. If you want more information, please Google it. Just tons of stuff about what's being furloughed and what's not. So FHWA is operating as normal. FTA is furloughed and not operating. EPA is not operating. Everything seems to be fine right now. We're telling people that if this does drag on for any amount of time, any decisions or actions that require a dual signature, such as air quality conformity determinations, STIP approvals, things like that, we don't know what we're going to do. We don't have anything immediate. I think the next things are either in summer or beyond, so we're just giving everyone a heads up in terms of transportation of that's how we're being affected.
Thank you for that update.
Any questions for Aaron? Anything other public comments? Comments on the minutes? Can I get a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Board of Directors report.
Ken, you didn't print out my Board of Directors report. Let's see. Yeah, I'm trying to remember the Board of Directors report. I believe Catherine had two items on the agenda that would be of interest to you all. One was the first round of information on the performance targets, and then the other was tip amendment number 5. Both passed, or one passed, and the other will go back again next month for actual action. And those were the two transportation-related items on the agenda.
Thank you, Don, Catherine, and Ken. Item 6A, cost overrun request and TIP amendment. Catherine?
Hello, Catherine Winger, Transportation Planner. This is a two-part memo. The first part is to request cost overrun application approval or selection and then approval, and then TIP amendment number 6 as part of TIP amendment number 6. The first part, we had $2,526,355 available for cost overruns, and this is STP Metro money. We put out a request for applications back in December, and we received 3 applications, one from Colorado Springs for 30th Street, one from Fountain for Indiana, and then one combined request, as we discussed last month, from PPACG for potentially regional traffic counts. And I don't know if you guys want to talk a little bit more about your project requests and the amount that you requested, or if you want me to just summarize.
We'll probably just go through them all, so.
Okay.
Just a question, really. So previously, the TAC approved the $1 million to go to the 30th Street project. Did that go away? Because there was unanimous support for that. Now, I know that our request kind of showed that we acted like it wasn't there, but I need clarification of that.
And that's something I don't think we have a rule on, but you didn't withdraw your application, you just put it on pause for now. So
Right.
I kind of assume that the TAC is still okay with it, but that I was going to leave up to you. And then I just called that out on the memo that you had previously approved, just over $1 million for this project, and now they're requesting 2.5 instead of just the 1 million, so additional as well.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, Madam Chair. So, Tim, from our perspective, this committee recommended those funds. Before it went on to the CAC, you asked to just hold that. Those funds were not placed back into the pool. So in our mind, at least, from PPACG perspective, those funds are in the process of being programmed for the 30th Street project, and this request would be in addition to that. So, Catherine, you correct me if I'm wrong, we never put that money back in the pool, so that money is still sitting there for 30th Street. It's up to this committee if they want to add to the funds that they've already approved with this current request. So at a minimum, you've got that, and unless someone were to come back and say, we'd like to have a motion of reconsideration of our previous action to deal with that previous funds, in our mind, at least from a procedural perspective, that's not part of the discussion. But again, there is a procedure. If one of the jurisdictions wanted to reopen that, we would. But it is not our intent at PPACG to do that. And in our mind, that is the status of that, is it's still in process, on hold, unless acted upon by another committee.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Was that helpful?
That's what I was wondering.
So then I have a question, and since I can't look it up since I'm running the meeting. When we sent out the request in December, because it was after we all met, was the amount in that 2.5 or was it 1.5? Did it take out the monies that we had already voted on, or did it say 2.5?
And that's where it's kind of my fault, because I did not know the procedure for this. And so all of the money, the 2.5 that is available, includes that 1 million, because it hadn't been officially programmed for the project. So it was on hold.
So that's why my number is more than whatever the remaining was, is because when it was sent out, it said we had $2.5 million available, so that's how that number ended up being what it is. Just in case anyone's wondering.
So that 2.5 is really closer to 1.5.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
And it's actually
Go ahead.
It's actually 1.6. It's the additional funds came from a City of Colorado Springs project that we returned last month. So
So is that additional return in the 2.5?
Yes.
It is, okay.
that's where
So
the 2.5
5
came from.
Okay.
Okay, so now you've confused me, and I work here. So how much, so subtracting out the 1.5 or whatever that we did back in November, how much is actually unprogrammed at this point, Catherine, that we're talking about today? Is that 2.5 or a different number?
It's definitely
It's
a different
it's
number.
2.5 minus the just over 1, thank you,
Okay.
Victoria. So it's 1.5, $1,501,412 to be exact.
Okay. And so then, so again, just to be fair, because this is, like I said, I'm even a little confused at this point. Madam Chair, did you need to adjust your request at all? Because obviously, if we're giving you the number, that, do you need to make any
Correct.
adjustments?
Right, so at this point in time, I mean, I could request more than the 1.5, but at this point in time, it doesn't matter. I mean, it would still be less than what I requested, so I could request the 1.5, and then we could take up the discussion from there. So at least it fits within what we've previously voted upon. Does that make sense to everybody?
And that
little
applies
remotely.
to the city too, because we did
Correct.
we did the
You-
same as you,
right.
so ours would match the 1.5 also.
Sorry, everyone.
That's okay.
It's okay.
I wasn't sure what to do since you had put it on hold.
Victoria?
All right, I'm going to play King Solomon and say if we split the 1.5 between the two of you, would that be acceptable to both of the jurisdictions?
You're waiting for me, aren't you?
Of course I'm waiting for you.
It's difficult. I had a meeting just before this. We are looking at every means for cost savings. They just gave me the analysis to where we could hopefully reduce costs by doing full road closures to save on construction costs. We're looking at we have part of our cost is the slope stability, and so we're looking at maybe raising the road and addressing, trying to reduce our costs that way. So we're looking at every which way we can to try to minimize and keep our project whole. From that meeting, they told me that we need it all still. And but this hasn't had full analysis yet, so, we're still looking. And I can't say that I can take it and not have to rescope, because I still might be looking at a rescope if we were cut, if we took a reduced amount. And I don't know if you would still be able to have a substantial project with half of it.
I mean, the way that mine is going, it's going. So we've made it through the NEPA process. We're in the process of doing right away. It will be spent in some way, shape, or form. So I know that it may not make the project whole, and I may have to backfill it in other ways, but it'll definitely reduce the cost that we're going to have to come up with, or we just do the same thing you're doing and rescope it.
Unfortunately, we're in the situation where no matter what we do, neither one of you are going to be whole.
Correct. I mean, we're not whole to start with, which is why we're here.
Right, and so that's why I throw out the option of just splitting it, because then at least you both walk away with something instead of one walking away with something that still doesn't finish it and the other walking away with nothing. So I'm just looking for some type of consensus way to approach it and to give everybody something. And I will highlight, the county has already talked about removing the request for the traffic counts at this time because there's so much that's going to a project. We were looking at the traffic counts mostly because there was money there. and we wanted to spend it and not lose it. But if it's able to go to 2 projects that need it, we can wait, rescope, figure out some other funding source. I know John has come up with some options that are potentially viable for the counts. So we'll at least pull that request out of it, and that would give you both about $750 more than you have now.
So, to get this right, we're sticking with the 1.02 that was previously approved for 30th Street, and then you're saying splitting the remaining 1.5, so 750 per
Yeah.
entity, okay. Is that your motion?
Well, maybe let me look over. If I made that motion, would
It's tough because I wish, had we been doing this in December, then it would have been, $500,000 to each of us, maybe that's how it would have played out. And then we would have re-strategized our 1.6 we turned back. It would have been the other one where we drop a project to try to keep the project whole.
even though Aaron told us we can't do that anymore.
No, that's true. Darn it, Darren.
Sorry, I had to blame Aaron for that.
I didn't know you wrote the federal regulation.
Yeah. I think do what you have to do.
Well, I don't have to. I'm just,
Right, nobody has
trying to help.
to do anything. She's
Yeah.
just trying to come up with solutions. So
Well, we
don't-
could do it a couple ways. I could make a motion, since I am a Colorado Springs, the second Colorado Springs rep, I could make the motion that the full 1.5 goes to the city of Colorado Springs, and then we can have a vote. And it can either be passed or denied, or we can do it, 50-50. But either way to move it along, I think, would be great.
All right, well, since I brought it up, I'll be bold and just suggest that I will move that we take the remaining funds after we reserve the original vote from the city of Colorado Springs and split the leftover funding 50-50 between the city of Fountain and Colorado Springs.
I'll second.
Any comments in the audience? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? That went faster than I could have expected. Thank you.
Sorry, it wasn't perfect for either of you.
Madam Chair? Can I say something?
Go right ahead.
All right. So since I just wanted to point out, and again, I don't have the exact number, but if you recall, we had somewhere in the neighborhood of $17, $18 million of one fund source. If you add the other, I think it was around 20 that we've been talking about for the last 7 or 8 months of funding that has to be obligated by June of 2020 or it goes away. So,
Wait, can you say that number again, just so I make sure I heard you correctly?
like, it was around, between the 2 different fund sources, around 20,
Actually, it was closer to 25 million.
so,
25 million.
and
not
that's my point.
1,000, not 250,000, 25, okay, just
Yes,
checking.
and I stopped the Madam Chair thing, you don't want me to do it.
No,
But that's,
I'm okay with that, go right ahead.
but that's my point is, again, we've got 2 projects that are ready to go, can definitely obligate the money.
Yes.
And yet we've got this big glut of money that's sitting here that is programmed to other projects. So I would again stress to everybody, if you have one of those projects that is part of that June 2020 deadline, and you have even an inkling that you may not be able to make that deadline for obligation, if you gave back the money, we've got a home for it now, and then we could reprogram that project in a later year, so that way, you would have more time to do it and you're not as stressed trying to deliver. So it could be sort of a win-win all the way around. So again, just in case anybody had any sort of thought process that, well, if I gave it back, maybe PPACG, maybe the region couldn't use it. Here's our example. The region can use those funds. We've got projects ready to go. And so I would ask everyone again to go back and look at your projects. If you've got a project, either part of that 2020 or even in the current year, that you're thinking may not be able to be delivered, please let us know, and then that way we can, again, follow the process. If you return the funds, we'll send out an email to everybody saying these funds are available. Everyone would then have the opportunity to give us an application, but then we would bring it back to this committee, and if these projects are still looking for dollars, that might be a helpful solution. So again, I'm not trying to preach or anything. I just want to make sure everybody realizes, well, we've got two jurisdictions struggling for dollars. We've got this glut that's hanging out over us. So I apologize if that's being preachy, but I'm a dad. I can't help it. It's in my DNA. Thank you.
And those need to be obligated by 2020?
Yes, June of 2020, and in fact, the monies that you are receiving today are part of that pool. Is that correct, Catherine? So anything so when we program today, it's got to be obligated by June of 2020. Now, that obligation then moves it from the PPACG sort of account into, that the feds have, into a project-specific account, and then after it gets obligated, you'll have more time to then actually spend that.
So are these the plethora of emails I've been receiving from Catherine about scheduling quarterly meetings, or is...
Yeah, and that's to discuss all the projects that have that June of 2020 deadline, so we can make sure that things are moving along and see where they are.
So sitting between the two biggest entities, I can't imagine either of you have $25 million worth of projects that may or may not happen. So can we get a better idea of what your understanding of this $25 million is, so everyone understands whether or not it can or cannot be reallocated and how?
Well, I think for the last 8 months or so, we have been working on that, meeting with the different jurisdictions, talking about that. So again, Patty, you've been sort of working with the jurisdictions. Do you have any sense of when we'll have some better idea of?
Do you mind turning on your microphone, Patty?
Okay. I've been working with each of the jurisdictions, trying to stay on top of all of the projects that we've got going on and just seeing where they are. We're moving along on some of them. I don't know, I couldn't give you an answer as to when we can look at. You know, you've got a couple, we've got several all over, and they're just at various stages. And you know, the hang-ups on our side could be with clearances or environmental, or so I couldn't tell you. Yeah.
I think after the meeting that we've scheduled, we'll have a better idea of where things sit, and then I can tell you if there's something that we might be able to swap. And that's the first thing I was thinking as John started talking about that, is how we could do that. And I can think of a couple of projects right off the top of my head that if we don't see movement, I'm going to have that suggestion made at that meeting. So there's a couple of them that are made me promises, and I have a slip here, and so I think it may come to the point that we're going to have to figure out what we do with some of the funding, and it may go down that road. So you may be able to both become fully funded just based on circumstances beyond our control. Unfortunately, we've been working on a project this last week between PPACG, Patty, myself, our business office, City of Colorado Springs. It was originally funded in 2013, and we're trying to find all the pennies this week. And so, I mean, that gives you some idea. If you're running into a problem now that's going to take 2 years to get cleaned up, we had since 2013 to start looking at some of these things, and it's now 2019. So you may not make that date if we have to have a 2-year window. So we're just going to have to look at some things to see kind of where everything's at. And I think that this next look is going to give us a really good, hard direction, because we've done our due diligence for the past, it's been almost a year now that we've been doing this. So I think we're in a place now where it's going to become do or die. And we'll have to figure out where we go. Okay?
I think Brian had a question.
Sure. So this next meeting where we're going to be going over this, this is a follow-up to the meeting that you all had with us several months ago, right?
Yes.
So we should already have lists of projects that we're
Correct. Yes.
monitoring,
Yeah,
right? So
correct.
it's just an
Correct.
easy.
We're not adding anything into the mix.
Excuse me. Are there other MPOs in the state where they will be able to, where they will not be able to spend their June 2020 money and be redistributed?
You are unique in that respect, that you've been rolling this money forward all this time, because DRCOG has a 3 strikes and you're out. So if you don't do something in DRCOG, they take your money. And the folks here at PPACG have been very gracious in the fact that they let you continue to roll it forward for all those years. So you are unique.
Well, I think we'll all enjoy our uniqueness for the moment.
Or somewhat.
Any other comments on this? So, Brian?
I'm sorry, sure, one other comment. So besides projects or funding for projects that may be returned, what are the chances of other monies showing up and for us to do another quarterly cost overrun process?
Well, we'd have to have something that would be closed, and I don't think we have anything at this point that is closing out on any of your pots of funding at this point, because we're so far behind in getting it spent. So I can look and make sure that I'm not fibbing to you, because I haven't run a report, and John asked me that same question, and I don't have an answer. The last time I looked at it was before the holidays, but I will look and see if there's anything else that's been closed out or returned, and if it's there, then we have it available to spend.
So we could be coming to
Yes,
the end of
yeah.
this
Yes,
money.
yes.
Thank you.
That's it?
John?
And then I'm not trying to stretch this out, especially since I actually have to catch a flight, so if I can sneak out. But I do want to point out that, again, in the past, there was this practice where someone would come in and say, hey, I'm going to do this project, it's going to be, and I'm just pulling numbers out of the air, but it's going to be $10 million, really $2 million of it for design, another $1 million for right-of-way, and the other $7 million for construction. And you got all that money in sort of that lump sum, and I think that was part of how this all sort of happened. In the future, we'll want to sort of make sure that we're programming phases, because you're going to need to do design first, and then that'll be we'll give you'll come in and ask for that money, and then we'll sort of think about or reserve the construction 2 or 3 years down the road, sort of thing. Anyway, there's a better way of sort of programming all of this so we don't end up in this sort of situation again. That being said, for those again that are in the situation where they've got a bunch of money and they can't spend all of it only because they can't do the construction yet, but they still need the money for the design, it's not an all or nothing thing. I just want to make sure everybody understands that. So if you got a lump of money to design, purchase right away, and construct a project, and the construction obligation can't happen before 2020, we can always make sure you retain and keep the money to continue with the design and the right of way, but give back then that construction part, and then that construction part can be programmed down the road. I see nodding, so you agree that's a thing. I just want to make sure we're not here to hurt anybody, and we're not here to take anybody's money or stop any projects. On the contrary, we want to deliver as many projects as possible, including your two, which is why we're saying we can move things around, but we can only move things around if you allow us to do that, because, again, we do not have the authority and, quite frankly, the will where we're going to come in and tell any jurisdiction that we're going to take away their funding. With that being said, we can all work together to make this work a little smoother.
Tim?
Quick question. 2020, we have statewide household travel survey for $1 million. Is that going to be obligated by June of 2020?
That's part of your long-range plan.
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
Actually, they'll be transferred to DRCOG like it was last time,
Okay.
is the plan anyway.
And they'll obligate it by then?
Yeah, studies are very easy to obligate, so that's not going to be an issue. That'll go pretty quick.
Brian?
So, just a quick question for what we did about 10 minutes ago. So we recommended approval of tip amendment 6. So did that
Well,
also
not
take
really.
care of the,
We're not there yet.
Yeah, we didn't approve the amendment yet, just the,
all right,
The
so
application
but the
to
cost
go into the
overruns, the cost overrun request, so I guess each of you are going to be giving $15,000 up for the PPACG regional traffic counts?
No, that was removed.
Yeah,
That's not being funded.
Victoria took that out.
It's not being funded?
No.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, I pulled it off as, I'm sorry.
okay.
I pulled it off so that we, as John and I have talked about some other ways to do that, and we wanted to put the money towards rural projects, so we pulled that.
Okay.
We'll be shaking down CDOT for some funds, and we'll see what other sort of planning funds we might have.
Right.
Anything else? So now, as Brian has pointed out, we need a motion for the TIP amendment that reflects the vote that we just took and the CDOT asks that's part of the TIP amendment.
I'd like to make a motion that we recommend approval of TIP Amendment Number 6.
As written down by Catherine. Do you want him to describe that, or are you good with that?
I don't know what the rules are on that.
We usually allow it to be summarized as long as you understand that we're voting on what's in there.
Yeah, then that's fine with me.
Right, so,
I can make it longer.
so we're splitting the 1.5 million, whatever that exact number is.
The balance, with it.
Right.
To balance, yeah.
I think Victoria's was 50/50 of whatever is available.
Correct.
And
then
including
approving
the other 3 items on the second page of the
Right.
title memo, right?
For
Or of
CDOT.
the tip memo. Signal
Yeah.
replacement upgrades, the return of $50,000 from a faster transit grant, and the other one.
And the other one's just to say that add your decision.
Okay, perfect. Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Catherine?
The next item is the safety target performance measure setting, and this is an annual target setting that we have to do for the safety measures. I went over it in more detail last month, so I won't go over it fully this month. But basically, we have to decide if we want to accept the state targets that they have laid out, or if we want to come up with our own regional targets for just our area. And staff recommend, our PPACG staff has recommended that we support the state targets as we did in the previous year as well.
Any discussion on this item? Can we get a motion on this item?
So I'm making up for the last 2 years of not making any motion.
Oh, that's right. You go. I'll second.
I'd like to recommend approval of item 6B, safety measure target setting for calendar year 2019.
Second.
Any discussion? All those,
I do think it is important that we stay with the state ones, that we can run into issues if we create our own. And so I think it's good logic that we continue to utilize the same state ones.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Discussion item 7A, regional crash data coordination. Catherine?
This is more just an open discussion item. We're talking about the regional crash
Is your mic
data.
off?
This is more of just an open discussion about regional crash data. We have a contract with Vision Suite Zero, and we've discussed this a couple of times before, but we just wanted to go over it and make sure you guys understand that we renewed that contract, or are renewing that contract, and we would like to make that data available to you if you would like, or we could show you what kind of information that we can give you as well. And so that's kind of just an open discussion, if anyone wanted to talk about it.
Comments? Victoria?
PPACG has done an amazing job of getting the county the data that we've requested from the safety suite in a very timely manner. I think we have now made three requests for information on the safety data. We're finding it very, very useful. It's very easy to use and to read. We just got some data on Highway 105. We've asked them to take a look at some of the areas, especially intersections. We're looking to do an intersection plan. And so we're taking a look at some of our intersections and trying to look at areas where we think there could be improvements, and they're helping us with that. So we're really excited to see some of that data. It's coming in really good use for us. We've been able to utilize it, one, to answer some citizen questions we've received through customer service. We've been able to use it in discussions with our county commissioners. It's helping us to justify one of the projects that we are currently doing right now and are looking to continue. So it's helped us to explain why the project that we're doing is needed and why we're doing it now. And we're also really looking forward to using it for planning going forward and figuring out where maybe some of our hot spots might be. So if you've not done it yet, I highly encourage you to, the next time you get a question about an intersection or something like that from a citizen, just ask them to run the data for you. They do it very quickly. I don't think it's that hard for them to do, although I don't do it, so thank you for whoever does that for us. But it is really valuable information, so I do encourage you to take a look at it and utilize this resource that we have.
Any other comments? Karen?
What level of street does, can be assessed for crash data? Let me ask.
I'm not the one that actually runs this data, so I will.
As Ken's making his way to the microphone, I'm a little hurt, Catherine, that you looked at Ken first instead of me, but that's okay.
Oh, sorry.
I didn't.
I looked over at Ken.
Would you like to speak first? The data in the software is all streets. And the data, we've got data goes back about 10 years. Typically, crash accidents are based on the last 5 years, so it's kind of a rolling every year. If we continue it, we get a new year's worth of data, but we've still got the earlier data, and so you can eventually we'll be able to analyze earlier time periods versus current time periods and look for trends. But it's all roads, and so wherever the accidents are reported, they're identified in there, and then we're able to analyze that intersection or that stretch of road.
You could even use it to, like if you're looking at 10 years past, and you've done a project in the interim, and then there's some crash data later on, you can even compare the safety rates between the two to see how well your project worked in terms of safety. It's pretty cool stuff for nerdy people like me.
And kind of piggybacking on what Victoria said, part of the project, I mean, we can analyze intersections and roads for the accident history, but then the other module that we haven't used particularly well is that you can identify safety projects. You're going to put in stoplights instead of a stop sign. You're going to put in bigger stoplights, the reflective backgrounds. You're going to put in turn bays and stuff. And if you provide what you want to do and what it costs, the program will calculate the cost benefit in terms of what it costs for the project and then the expected reduction in injury and death accidents or total accidents. And so then you can kind of evaluate your project or several possibilities moving forward and then deciding, this looks like it might serve our needs.
And that cost benefit is important if you're putting in for the statewide safety funds. So that's part of the application. I mean, it's federal HSIP funds, but it's distributed through the state process. And part of that application is that you do the cost benefit, and that's the cost benefit that Ken's talking about. So that's helpful to help you put together your application to bring more money into the region. Just saying.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Catherine. Jason, so we're a little bit confused, Jason, and we want to make sure we're not missing something, because this has a page 1 It has no page 2, and then it has a page 3 of 3.
I think it should just be 2 pages, so it's probably just a page numbering issue.
Okay.
So as long as you have the 3 links
Yep.
and have been able to access the plans.
We're not missing something.
No.
Perfect.
not missing.
All right, thank you. Not yet. It's got to be read. You got to, it's the thing that looks like it's talking.
Okay. Thank you. I don't think I've been in front of this group yet, so I thought I'd just introduce myself real quick. I'm Jason O'Brien. I'm a transportation planner here at Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments. I got here in September, and I came from another MPO, which is in Wilmington, North Carolina. So that's me in 30 seconds. I've got 3 plans for you today for your discussion. The Public Participation Plan, the Title VI and Environmental Justice Plan, and the Limited English Proficiency Plan. The reason for doing these plans is to comply with federal regulations. They're all federally required. They're also usually more or less updated with each new long-range transportation plan, although we're a little out of sync in this cycle due to staffing changes and other factors. So we think these plans will probably relate more to the next long-range transportation plan, just because we're getting close to wrapping up the current one. So the next plan and the next tip, for the most part. There are procedural plans. These plans do not determine which projects can or will be funded. What they do is ensure that we just have a rigorous public process and that we're planning in a non-discriminatory manner. And that's pretty much what all 3 of these different plans do. Of the 3 plans, only the Public Participation Plan requires a formal public comment period. That one's been in progress for a couple weeks. I haven't gotten any comments so far. So I know 3 plans are a lot to throw at you, and you've spent long hours up at night with flashlights reading them. So I just thought, our thought process behind doing these simultaneously is just that they're closely related plans. Environmental justice and limited English proficiency requirements, for example, are both special applications of Title VI. Their goals, their analytical methods, the underlying regulations are all very similar, and they're really supposed to work together just to ensure an inclusive and rigorous public process and non-discriminatory planning. And I thought instead of going into detail on all these, I could let you ask questions where you have them, and I would just offer just a couple of comments and updates on each one, just so you can see what did we do this time. So a lot of changes to the Public Participation Plan, that one, are in response to our most recent federal certification review. And that's just where our federal partners come in and let us know where we're doing a good job complying with federal regulations and where we could do a little bit better. It was pointed out to us in the most recent review that we needed more specific information in our Public Participation Plan about accommodation for persons with disabilities. And we needed more specific information about how we plan to improve our rates of public participation. How are we going to do that, and how are we going to track it? How are we going to know if we're doing it? So that was added. Title VI. Previous Title VI plans, we thought, were really lacking some important clarification of terms and laws and regulations, as many of these types of plans often are, lacking those. So what we did was provide a lot more clarification of these items. What are Title VI and environmental justice? I know they're not high on everybody's radar, and not a lot of people know the difference or how to know if we're meeting our responsibilities. So we just really cleaned that up and made it very clear, and I think it's now a useful tool for understanding these things, the similarities, the differences, and the definitions, and whether or not we're meeting our responsibilities. I actually think it's now one of the most clearly defined plans of its kind that I've seen. So it's not very long, but we just want it to be very, very clear. And then finally, the Limited English Proficiency Plan, quite simply, is just really an extension of the Title VI plan, even though it's required to be a separate plan. So without getting into too much detail, it really extends the Title VI protection against discrimination by national origin, just through language. So legally, that's what it does. Where these plans really have their effect, where they hit home, is that when we're working on our major planning projects, like our long-range plan and our TIP, our federal and state partners will look at these plans and tell us whether we're being consistent. So, for example, if we're working on our long-range plan, someone could call up and say, hey, it's in your public participation plan that you're going to be seeking comments on social media. So make sure you include those comments in your final planning document so that we can see you've been consistent. So that's really how they hit home. As they're written, These plans are fairly flexible. They will allow for us, if it's the will of our committees and our board, to just meet federal requirements and move on. If that's what's wanted, they'll allow us to do that. But they also provide suggestions and a framework for going a great deal further, if that's what's desired. And we will be coming back to you next month to ask for your recommendation of these plans. And at that time, you will be able to recommend any, all, or none of the plans, although we hope you like them. With that, I know it's a lot of material. I don't want to talk at you for too long. Are there any questions or comments on any of these plans at this point?
Victoria?
So last time when you guys updated the public participation plan, you moved to a far more online type of outreach. Are you continuing that kind of effort?
Continuing and even increasing, I would say.
Excellent.
We think we're going to increase that because it's a growing trend, and there's nobody's really getting a great deal of participation in the traditional in-person public meetings, although we expect to continue doing those just because for some populations it's hard for them to do anything else. But we're just not expecting them to be really our main thing anymore.
Yep, I think that's very wise. We found at the county, in terms of our public participation efforts, we find them to be far more effective online. We have found, public meetings for entire county-wide plans where 3 people show up and you spend $20,000 prepping for, a meeting that really doesn't produce any results. So I'm glad that you're continuing to look at those other methods. They're far cheaper and far more effective. So
Great.
Good job.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Brian?
Yeah, while I haven't been reading these late at night with a flashlight, I have looked at them a little bit. And
Candle?
oil candle, yeah, that's what I still have. But, yeah, they look really good, and I hope to have a chance to read them a little bit more carefully. But thanks again for working with us to make sure we have that joint FTA language in there for, public process and public meetings and advertisements and all of that. That helps us both out, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
And we'll make sure that language is on our meeting announcements as well.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for Jason? Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 7C, 2045 RTP funding and projects. Ken?
Good afternoon, Ken Prather, PBACG Transportation Planner. In December, we had a workshop to develop resource allocations for the long-range plan out to 2045, and also to begin prioritizing draft projects. And I reported last month that we ran into some problems at the workshop, that some projects are missing, some projects didn't have the right dollar amounts. So I've been working on that since then. I think I found the issues that were going on and corrected those, and so the spreadsheet was sent out in your packet. There were 3 or 4 projects that had been scored and were listed in the master score, but then when they were broke out into the subcategories of TAP, congestion, planning, they didn't get carried forward into there. There were some projects that, transit and the RTA projects were not even included. And so when we wound up with a giant surplus of funds, it's because 2 major categories of projects weren't listed. So fixing all of that, this is the, Jess, could you shut the front light off there, please? Thank you. I can't read that.
I
Thank
still
you.
can't read it, but it's darker, so.
So at the workshop, the members that were present there, we did come up with the projected revenues. There hasn't been any changes to those dollars. What I have failed to include on here is the transit, which we identified here, was it $407 million. So that should be added in here as well, but
Is the cost and revenue of transit the same number? So that, is there a surplus or shortfall on the transit?
There's a
there,
shortfall.
this shortfall, well, these dollars right here with the PPRTA funds under the approach that John is taking compared to what we've done in the past, where it doesn't matter about categories of funds, it's what's the total. We have, with our total revenue and with the total cost identified, we've got 26 million still available.
Okay, and add in the transit piece then?
Now, we will go to transit.
Because that's a very exciting number, let me highlight.
Well, don't get excited.
Yet? Okay.
Transit, here's the 407 million
And
that
on
we've
that,
identified, and there are 694 million in transit projects. So in that category itself, we're 287 in the hole, and if you want to subtract that 26 million that was on the other, we're way in the hole. So I haven't had any comments about the revenues, changing that. I have worked with a couple of entities extensively to clarify some projects and the issues there in fixing this list. So now what we're proposing is to have a workshop in the next couple of weeks where we will bring this to a close and come back to the TAC next month asking for a final recommendation to the board for board approval in March.
Let John go first.
Tom?
so in addition to looking at everything before the workshop, Brian, that transit number I got by looking at the Federal Register for your for what the region would receive in, I think, 5307 funds, and then looking at the state ledger. So that was basically, you don't turn in a report after you get all your fact searching on Wikipedia. Well, I did all my fact search based on the internet. So if you've got a far better number that we can plug in, that might help with that shortfall some, because I'm probably low, especially since I don't have any local funds that the City of Colorado Springs would be putting into transit. And that could also be added as what is reasonably expected that Colorado Springs spends on transit over that 23-year period, 24-year period. I forgot what we're using. But that could also go against that shortfall.
Okay. Yeah, and I think as we get into our 2045 transit plan, I mean, our consultants will be trying to really define what the projected revenues are for that. And for everybody else, this entire list, or this whole tab here, are projects that were pretty much in the vision plan of the 2040 plan, the non-funded plan. And, I mean, from our perspective, we want to have these projects identified in the regional plan, but they would be paid for with our FTA funds. So it's kind of outside of the STP Metro TAP and, everything that we do here at PPACG. Except if you scroll all the way to the top, there are 4 projects that were rescored as part of this process from the 2040 plan. They were originally submitted in the 2040 plan. And, we can get into this at the workshop, but the Metro Rides program, I mean, we've reached the kind of the end of the life for additional CMAQ funding for that. So, but the 3 projects below that, we would most likely withdraw them from being part of, the new project list for 2045. I think the The new one that we submitted for this round was the bus stop ADA compliance accessibility. So that's a $1.8 million project. I think we would rather have that one.
I think that is on one of the other tabs, so that's
in the tab.
included already in the other total.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can leave those 3 accessibility projects there with the scores, but I'm okay with those not withdrawing money from other pots for this round, if that makes sense. As long as the ADA project does well. I don't want it all, I just want a little bit.
That's how I feel, Brian.
Yeah.
John?
And then also, what we'd like to do, or at least get a sense from you today, is for the workshop, again, we've split CDOT as a sort of a separate list, and so we'd like to make sure that at that workshop, we go through this list, and again, hopefully, we've gotten to a point where the discussion won't be too terribly long, and we can get a fiscally constrained list here, and that won't take too much time, and then spend the rest of the workshop going over that CDOT list. Did I misspeak?
That's correct, and then you also wanted to introduce the concept of regional projects.
Yes. So the other thing that we'd like to discuss at the workshop, and have you guys, we'll chat about it now very briefly, so you guys can all think about it and see how you feel about it. But our plan right now, the PPACG plan, is far more detailed than it needs to be, and it's very specific on different things. You have to do that for capacity projects, so you can't just put in there freeways region-wide. That's not allowable. If it's capacity, you have to have it specifically named in the model with the termini, and then, specifically mentioned in the plan, and then you actually have to have it modeled. So that's not going to change. So it's not a free-for-all. But that being said, smaller non-capacity projects can be pooled, and in my opinion, or my recommendation to you, is that you should have those included in the plan. Things like, and again, this will be up to you to decide what you want the categories to be, but things like planning studies region-wide, pedestrian improvements region-wide, intersection safety improvements region-wide, those sorts of things. And then, again, it still needs to be a fiscally constrained plan, so I have to put some funding towards it. But in my mind, if you have 4 of these sort of, for lack of a better term, catch-all sort of pools with about $10 million each, so if you end up with like $40 million within your fiscal constraint, that will then allow you to come back 2 years from now and say, oh, we want to do a study on something, and that doesn't make me say, oh, well, I'm sorry, your study isn't specifically listed in the long-range plan. You're going to have to do a long-range plan amendment before you can get into the TIP. So that's the idea, is to give you more flexibility. Again, it's allowable, at least up to now has always been allowable within the federal process. It's just that PPACG has decided to be more restrictive than required. And Aaron didn't throw anything at me, so I think we're still good with that concept. So if you're amenable to that, again, it's not our plan, it's your plan that we're facilitating. If you're amenable to that, that would be my recommendation at the workshop, that you add 3 or 4 or 5 categories, however you want to divvy it up, whatever you want to name it, and then put $40 or $50 million towards that. That would count towards your fiscal constraint.
Jason?
So these are just still projected revenues. Remind me, when do we know exactly when they're going to, or are we going to work at the workshop with real numbers or just projected numbers?
So CDOT will have us, give us more refined numbers in March. Again, we can continue to work with these numbers because it just says that the federal regulations say that we are required to develop a financial plan in coordination with our state and federal partners. So based on the best information available. So we can we can move forward, and it's probably going to be very close to this, but then after March, we get the numbers, we'll look at it, and then if we want to go back and have to take one project or two projects off, or add one or two projects, that would be a much quicker exercise. But allowing us to move forward with these draft numbers allows us to start the modeling process and some of these other things so that we can be further along to make sure that we still make our deadline of adoption in, Catherine, is it November of this year? November of this year. Is that cool if we continue? Okay.
Yeah, no, I just curious on what numbers we're working with.
Victoria?
Brian, can I ask that you take a look at those transit numbers and try and get those revenues and projects sort of in line so that it doesn't impact the other funding? And since it's all you anyway, before the workshop, so that we can take a look at that $26 million number and maybe pull our pools out of that. Which, let me highlight in case anybody doesn't realize, that $26 million surplus means that every project that we all submitted for the plan will be in the plan and funded in the plan. And this $26 million is money that would be available for us to do the pools that John is talking about, as long as those transit numbers of projects and revenues get to be closer to the same number. And that's why I'm asking Brian for that. Does that make sense?
So you're asking that we have our projected revenues for the next,
No, I'm just asking that you figure out a way to make if you need to adjust your own projects and the number of projects in there to get it close to your current total number, then we don't need to subtract that shortfall out of this STP, out of these other numbers. So I'm asking you to take your transit projects, make them whole within your transit category so that we can look at all the other categories separately. And that the two large chunks of money don't impact each other. Since you're the only one that has access to the transit funds.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Sure, yeah. But do we really have to do that, though, since it is money aside from what we're all trying to program here?
So when we talk about transit funds, it's basically a one-way valve. So you can't spend transit dollars on other projects. However, you can spend the other dollars on transit projects. So to answer your question, yes, that is correct. You can take any one of your transit projects. They would be STP eligible unless you had a lot of operations. I think there's a cap on operation funds. But anything that is capital, you could ask for, or infrastructure, you could ask for STP dollars for. So transit can ask for the STP dollars, but some of your STP projects can't ask for transit dollars. So to answer your question, no, it's not required, other than, but I think she's making the request as far as looking at maybe the revenue side of it, and then any of the ones that you really know you don't want to do. That way we're not spending a lot of time chatting about it. But
Well, and let me ask the question then. Would you go back to the transit one? Thank you. Down to the bottom. So my thought is, and tell me if I'm wrong, because I certainly could be, I'm not the transit expert, doesn't this have to show fiscal constraint as well?
Well, this entire tab, with the exception of those top 4 projects, were in the non-constrained project list. So there was no fiscal constraint. These were just our
So these are just still being as
vision
unfunded?
projects. Yes, and that's all I really want, is just that they're noted in the plan, even if they're unfunded. But
I understand.
And we would use our own sources of funds for those, but.
And we will have an unfunded section. Because if you remember, I think a couple months ago, I said after we finish this exercise, we want to go back and revisit the CDOT, what do you call those lists?
Development lists.
Development lists. So after we're finished with this exercise, we want to go back and do our 3 CDOT development lists of roadway projects, transit projects, and then alternate mode projects, because I think bicycle and pedestrian was combined. So this is sort of that first step. Anything that doesn't get funded, gets funded for this or doesn't get funded to this, then moves over to that those CDOT lists. And remember, on the CDOT lists, we can then go back and sort of dream big. Here, you were given the restrictions of you couldn't ask for more money than was available, you had to do this, you had to do that, you had to eat your vegetables. We gave you a lot of constraint. For the CDOT list, basically the constraint is you have to make sure, this is if money were to fall from the sky. I always used to say, like, find money in the seat cushions, but CDOT likes to say, if money was to fall from the sky, what would be your projects and how would you prioritize them? That way, if another 109 or another 110 comes around, there's this list. Those lists, because it's not federal dollars and are CDOT lists that are to sort of identify the unfunded needs within the region, you can come back and say, yeah, we didn't have a light rail in the PPACG list, but we sure would like a light rail on this one because the criteria is different for having it on there. And I just use that example, but I think you get the gist of it. That's a little less restrictions in developing those lists, and we'll do that a couple months down the line. You were looking at me like I said something wrong. Oh, I'm good. Whew. I shouldn't sit next to you. You can elbow me pretty easy, so.
Brian?
So looking at can you go back to the total funds tab that shows the surplus and the shortfall? Please. So, this is misleading, right? It shows we have a $26 million shortfall, but that's because the RTA row is...
No, the RTA is included in here. What's missing from this particular tab is the transit tab.
Yeah, but I kind of see where Brian's going with
What I'm
this.
saying is, we don't really have a $26 million surplus.
While I recognize that, this then, because it's showing a surplus, we in essence can include all the projects as funded in the plan, and they're therefore eligible for TIP funding that comes along because we've not listed the federal source for every single solitary project. So it provides us that flexibility that we've never been allowed from past staff to do. And so I think this is a terrific way to go. It's very exciting. It gives us all a chance to compete for those TIP funding later on, which is really where the rubber meets the road.
Right.
So I get
Thanks.
that. I get where we're funding it, but I'm okay with it too.
Yeah, that's good.
So then maybe if Brian's transit tab gets reconciled, what this meeting will be about is putting those projects in order and not necessarily determining where we draw the line. We don't even have to do order?
Yeah, we just have to list them, right?
Right, we're not required to, the workshop will not require us to put everything in order.
Okay.
The workshop is only required for us to achieve fiscal constraint because the long-range plan document itself does not require a listing of priority, but rather a listing of funding. So we don't need to go through and do that. The reason for the priority, the only reason for to do a priority would be if we believe we are woefully off of our estimate versus the estimate that we would receive from CDOT, and that it would be the quickest way to then say, what projects do we cut? I would suggest that I believe, while we might not be perfect, we're probably so close that it's a better use of our time to wait for those CDOT numbers to come, find out how much we need to do, and then come back and say, okay, do we really want to prioritize this whole list, or do you want to just tell me which one is on the bottom two, or what's the bottom 5 million? I got to trim 5 million. What's our bottom 5 million? And then you just pick 2 projects that you want to remove. That would be far less painful than trying to go through and do that whole list, and actually very time consuming. So, but again, it's up to you. If you guys want to prioritize everything, so you have a list, so you know where to draw the line, you can certainly do that. But we just are trying to do it in such a way that values your time. But we're amenable.
Scores kind of prioritize?
Right, they do, but some of us had took issue with the scoring, so that's why we were going to have that conversation.
Some, all, yeah. I think all of you had
Somebody
issues.
might not have. I didn't want to make an assumption. So
I'm
then,
pretty sure everybody had issues, but that's okay. I appreciate you transparent my feelings.
yeah. So
And I would just remind people of the comment that's been made a couple of times at this meeting already, is that we're going to replace this plan in 4 years. We're only going to do one tip, maybe 2 tips before the next plan is, well, it has to be approved in 4 years. And in our current tip schedule, we're only going to do 1 new tip. So that's only 1 or 2 new years out of the 20 we're talking about. So as long as you've got the projects that you're going to do in 2023 and 2024, do you really want to argue about a project that may or may not be done in 2039? We'll do 5 plans before that date arrives.
Not you.
Not me. I'm becoming very, very impartial here. Another way of saying I don't care.
Not you and not me.
Yeah, I live with that every day.
So does that make it time sensitive then, this workshop? Or would then the workshop be more about discussing the CDOT projects and not necessarily about figuring out what does or doesn't make the cut?
The workshop, and Catherine, you know the schedule better than I, so you might want to hang around a microphone, but the schedule, it's still, the workshop's time sensitive for us because we need to take the preferred project list to the board to get their approval, so it's got to go through the process. So because of the length of the process, we'd still like to have the workshop so that you guys look at the list and say, yes, this is the list that we're recommending as of now based on the best available financial data, because again, we did do it all together based on the best financial data. If we get better financial data, we'll make adjustments. But that being said, for our schedule, it would be important for us to have the workshop relatively soon to do that, to have the list looked at by you guys before our February meeting. So workshop, we can't take any action, right? You guys already know that. So the workshop happens before our February meeting. At our February meeting, you approve what you did at the workshop, and then it can start working its way through the committees as the draft list. So that way, then we can start with all the open houses and all those other things. The bulk of the meeting will probably be the CDOT list to go over that, because again, I'm not sure if anyone's mentioned this or not, but the scoring criteria did not favor projects that were intra-city versus inter-city. So, did I say that right? Intra versus inter? Anyway, you know what I mean. So definitely we want to make sure that we have that conversation on the CDOT list, because while, yes, CDOT knows what their priorities are and what they'd like to do and what they can do, the federal regulations does say that they will do their projects in consultation and coordination with all of you. So this makes sure that we're doing something and that they're delivering the program and the priorities that you all sort of buy into. And that moves down the line then when Karen's trying to do something and needs our jurisdictional support at the State Transportation Board or something, we can all go there and say, yes, we approved all these priorities, we all did them together, and this is what we want to see done as a region.
And you know, sometimes it takes 2 months to get that through the board.
Okay.
So that could be an issue. So that way they have a opportunity to have someone talk to them about the projects, and then they have the ability to say, yes, this is the priority that we agree with.
And I think our February TAC meeting will be after Valentine's Day, so I'll buy those little heart things half price, and I'll bring them in.
What a guy.
Oh, half price. What do you can't walk away from that.
And I may have missed it, but you haven't sent something out to try and schedule that workshop yet, have you?
He said to do it after this meeting.
Yep.
Just to make sure we still want to talk to you.
Send out a doodle poll and try for the next couple of weeks, certainly no later than the 8th. That's a Friday. That'll give us time until the next Thursday to get everything typed up and correct format and mailed out in the packet.
Okay.
And Catherine will send that out.
Okay. Any other comments on this item?
Thank you.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you.
Member entity announcements? Tim?
I guess the city of Colorado Springs has a huge announcement. Kathleen Krager has decided to retire. She actually was transportation manager for 10 years, which is a long time for traffic engineers. She had a tough job. She's done a great job of helping out this committee kind of come together before and doing other good things within the community. So she's going to be missed. The city has a commitment to try to replace that position as soon as we can. But yes, so her official retirement date is February 1st. She has some sick time to burn, so she's actually taking advantage of that since she can't cash that in. But we'll miss her.
Yes, we will. And I keep forgetting this silly button. We will miss her. She has been a huge asset to the reason. She has taken a lot of heat personally for her professional judgment, whether you agree or don't agree with it. But she has been a huge resource for us, and she will be missed. So please pass on our thanks to her and our best wishes for her future. Thank you.
Any other announcements? Items for future TAC meetings? Okay, we're going to let John go catch a plane.
We'll adjourn without you.
All right, Brian, do I need a motion or not?
No.
Okay, then we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice job.
What's the situation? Council?
Detail what those were. So he doesn't like it. I want to try to call him on the other. I want to do it.